Shattered 4 bags and stumbled steps were her trademarks, the quiet symphony of her incompetence. In the sterile, high-stakes ballet of the Brightstone General Trauma Center, Nurse Ilara Vance was a ghost of a different sort, a clumsy, whispering apparition, forever apologizing for her own existence. But the clumsiness was a meticulously crafted lie, a shield forged in the catastrophic fires of a life she had aggressively tried to bury. The day a hero's daughter stopped breathing in the chaos of an unfolding assassination, that shield would not just crack, it would violently disintegrate, revealing the unyielding apex predator who had been hiding in plain sight all along. The air in the trauma center was a toxic soup, a suffocating miasma of antiseptic, stale coffee, and the faint, metallic tang of human fear. It was a pressure cooker of controlled chaos, a relentless assault on the senses that Ilara Vance had deliberately chosen as her sanctuary. The constant high-pitched beeping of monitors, the squeak of gurney wheels on polished linoleum, the urgent, clipped conversations of doctors. It was all a kind of white noise that drowned out the louder, more violent sounds she still heard in her sleep. The suppressed pops of silenced weapons, the deafening roar of a Black Hawk's rotors, the final, ragged breaths of men she had tried and failed to save. Here, the stakes were life and death, but they were procedural, governed by charts and protocols, a world away from the absolute anarchic finality of a kill zone. She moved through this world like a shadow with 2 left feet. Today, her assigned task was menial, restocking the crash carts in Bay 4. Her hands, which could flawlessly field strip a rifle in total darkness or place a life-saving chest tube in a bucking helicopter, fumbled with the sterile plastic packaging of a simple catheter. The box slipped, spilling its contents in a silent, accusatory cascade across the floor. Ilara flinched, a full-body cringe of practiced shame. "Sorry," she mumbled to the empty hallway, her voice a barely audible whisper. She knelt, her movements deliberately awkward as she gathered the scattered supplies, her pale face a mask of meek mortification. This was her camouflage. In a world of predators and prey, she had chosen to be the mouse, the bottom of the food chain, the one nobody ever watched twice. Because being watched was dangerous. Being seen was a death sentence. A sharp clicking sound on the linoleum announced the arrival of Director Elizabeth Thorne. Thorne was not a medical professional. She was a bureaucrat, a creature of spreadsheets and public relations, who had clawed her way to the position of hospital administrator. She was a woman whose profound insecurity was armored in $1,000 suits and a voice honed into a weapon of passive-aggressive cruelty. She moved through the hospital, not as a leader, but as a predator of a different kind. One who fed on the fear and humiliation of her subordinates. Her eyes, cold and calculating, landed on the kneeling form of Nurse Vance. Vance. Thorne's voice was like ice water down the spine. Still finding new and creative ways to be utterly useless, I see? Is it that difficult to hold a simple box? Or is the very concept of gravity too complex for your mind to grasp? The words were delivered with a small, tight smile that never reached her eyes, a performance for the benefit of a passing surgical resident who wisely chose to study the scuffs on his shoes. Ilara kept her head down, her blonde hair falling to hide her face. "I'm so sorry, Director Thorne. It slipped. I'll clean it up immediately." The apology was breathy, pathetic. It was exactly what Thorne wanted to hear. "See that you do," Thorne snapped, her tone dripping with condescension. "We run a world-class institution here, not a rehabilitation center for the chronically clumsy. I'll be reviewing your quarterly performance report this afternoon. I suggest you give me a reason, any reason at all, not to terminate your employment." She didn't wait for a reply, simply pivoted on her heel and continued her imperious march down the hall, leaving a wake of chilled silence behind her. Ilara remained on her knees for a long moment, listening to the fading clicks of Thorne's heels. She took a slow, deliberate breath, the scent of bleach and floor wax filling her lungs. It was the price of anonymity. The public humiliation was a small, bitter pill to swallow for the prize of being invisible. She reached for the last fallen catheter, and for a fleeting second, the long sleeve of her scrubs rode up, revealing the ghost of a tattoo on her wrist. A faded, stylized skull with a serpent coiled through its empty eye sockets. She quickly pulled the sleeve down, her expression unreadable, before resuming her role as the hospital's most incompetent nurse. The relative calm of the mid-morning was violently shattered not by a sound, but by a pre-arrival notification that crackled over the charge nurse's radio. It was a Code Omega, a designation so rare that most of the staff had only ever read about it in manuals. It signified a high-priority patient with a national security attachment. The chaos that followed was instantaneous and overwhelming. Doors flew open. Doctors and nurses moved with a new, frantic energy. Director Thorne reappeared, her face flushed with a mixture of panic and predatory excitement. This was a crisis, but for her, it was also a stage.
Clear Bay 1. I want a full security lockdown on this wing.
Thorne's voice was a shriek, a stark contrast to the controlled urgency of the medical teams. No one in or out without my express authorization. Where is Dr. Carter? Get me the chief of trauma surgery, now. Her orders were a flurry of bureaucratic noise, focused on control and appearance rather than medical necessity. The automatic doors hissed open, and the world outside seemed to pour in. A phalanx of grim-faced men in dark suits, their lapels adorned with Secret Service pins, formed a moving wall around a single gurney. On that gurney lay the broken form of a man whose face was known to anyone who followed the news of global conflicts. Navy SEAL Commander Jack Wolverine Riley, a celebrated hero, a man who had stared down death in a dozen countries. He was pale, his breathing shallow, his formidable physique diminished by pain and blood loss.
His uniform was torn and stained, not with the mud of a foreign battlefield, but with the dark, wet crimson of a catastrophic internal injury. The official story, already being fed to the media, was a severe training accident. Alara, watching from the periphery, knew that was a lie. The single, small-caliber entry wound just below his Kevlar plate, the specific pallor of his skin, the almost imperceptible tremor in his extremities. This wasn't an accident. It was a targeted, professional hit. Beside the gurney ran a woman, his wife, her face a mask of frantic terror. And clutching her hand was a small girl, no older than 7, with her father's piercing blue eyes, wide with a horror no child should ever witness. The family was swept along in the tide of medics and security, a small island of personal tragedy in a sea of procedural emergency. Director Thorne intercepted the lead surgeon, Dr. Ben Carter, a sharp, competent man with the weary eyes of a veteran. Carter had been a Navy surgeon himself before coming to Brightstone, and he moved with an economy of motion that spoke of years spent in high-pressure environments. Dr. Carter, Thorne began, her voice low and conspiratorial. The optics on this are critical. The Secretary of Defense is on his way. We need to project an image of absolute control. Carter barely glanced at her, his focus entirely on the monitors being hooked up to his patient. My only concern, Director, is the catastrophic bleeding in his chest cavity. Get me a full workup, CBC, coag panel, and cross-match 10 units of O-neg, stat. He was all business, but Thorne persisted, placing a manicured hand on his arm. Ben, listen to me. We follow the standard VIP protocol. No experimental procedures, nothing that could be perceived as a risk. We stabilize, and we follow the book. Do you understand me? Her words were a veiled threat, a reminder of who controlled the budgets, and ultimately, his career. Carter's jaw tightened, but he nodded curtly, his attention already lost to the symphony of beeps and alarms that now surrounded Commander Riley. Alara watched the exchange from a distance, a cold knot forming in her stomach. Following the book was about to get this man killed. The subtle neurological signs, the specific nature of the wound, the book had nothing on this. This was the work of a chemical agent, a poison delivered by the bullet, designed to cause a cascading systemic failure that would mimic a simple traumatic injury. And nobody saw it but her. The situation deteriorated with shocking speed. Commander Riley's blood pressure began to plummet, an unstoppable fall that resisted the frantic infusion of fluids and blood products. Dr. Carter worked with grim determination, his commands to the nursing staff crisp and clear, but a subtle sheen of sweat on his brow betrayed his growing desperation. He was treating a massive hemorrhage, a catastrophic wound, but he was fighting the wrong enemy. It was like trying to patch a bursting dam with chewing gum. Director Thorne hovered near the edge of the trauma bay, her phone pressed to her ear as she managed the external politics of the crisis. Her face was a mask of strained authority, her contributions to the actual medical emergency limited to sharp, unhelpful questions. "Why isn't his pressure responding? Are you sure you've given him enough blood?" she demanded, her voice grating on the nerves of the focused medical team. It was then that the true crisis, the one that would shatter Alara's carefully constructed world, unfolded. In the small, glass-walled waiting room adjacent to the trauma bay, Commander Riley's daughter, Lily, suddenly gasped. Her small hands went to her throat, her eyes wide with a silent, panicked plea. She had been holding a small, plush wolf, a toy her father had given her, one that had been with him in the ambulance, pressed against his wound by a well-meaning paramedic. A toy that was now a vector, a secondary contamination. The little girl's face began to turn a dusky, terrifying shade of blue. She made no sound, her airway completely locked in a paralytic seizure. Her mother screamed, a raw, piercing sound of pure maternal terror that cut through the clinical din of the ER. The scream drew every eye. Dr. Carter looked up, his face torn between his dying patient and the new, horrifying emergency. Director Thorne froze, her phone slipping from her grasp. Her face went slack with a terror that had nothing to do with concern, and everything to do with the catastrophic loss of control. "A doctor! Somebody help her! Get a crash cart in there!" she shrieked, her voice cracking with hysteria. Her response was pure, unadulterated panic, a flailing of useless commands that only added to the chaos. But someone was already moving. In the split second between the mother's scream and Thorne's frantic shrieking, something inside Alara Vance broke. It wasn't a decision, it was an instinct, a reflex forged in blood and fire. The years of practiced meekness, the carefully constructed facade of the clumsy, apologetic nurse, it all evaporated like mist in a desert wind. The world narrowed to a single, sharp point of focus, a dying child. The ambient noise of the ER faded to a dull roar. The frantic movements of the staff became a slow-motion irrelevance. The cage shattered. The statue cracked. Her slumped, subservient posture snapped ramrod straight, her spine aligning with the rigid discipline of a soldier on high alert. The fumbling uncertainty vanished from her limbs, replaced by a fluid, predatory grace. Her eyes, usually downcast and vacant, now blazed with an intense, cold fire, scanning, assessing, and processing with the speed of a combat computer. She moved, not with the shuffling gait of Nurse Vance, but with the explosive, deliberate economy of Ghost. She was across the room in 3 long strides, her hand already snatching a 14-gauge 1.5 catheter from a nearby tray as she passed. She didn't ask for permission. She didn't wait for orders. She was the authority now. "Get me a saline flush and the tubing from a pediatric drip set," she said. Her voice was unrecognizable. The timid whisper was gone, replaced by a low, calm, and absolute command that sliced through the panic like a surgeon's scalpel. A young nursing aide, Maya, the one who had always shown Alara small kindnesses, simply stared, her mouth agape, before her training kicked in and she scrambled to obey. Alara dropped to one knee beside the child. There was no time for intubation, no time for a formal tracheotomy. The girl had seconds. With one hand, she tilted Lily's head back, her fingers expertly finding the cricothyroid membrane in the child's throat. With her other hand, she held the long, thick-gauge needle. It was a desperate, improvised field procedure, a cricothyrotomy with a needle, something taught for catastrophic battlefield injuries when all other options were gone. It was a move of last resort, one that no civilian nurse would ever be trained, let alone authorized, to perform. "What in God's name do you think you're doing, Vance?" Director Thorne's voice, now a full-blown scream of outrage, finally found its target. "You touch that child, and I will have you arrested. Security! Get her away from that girl!" Alara didn't even flinch. She didn't look up. Thorne, the hospital, the rules, they were nothing. They did not exist in this moment. There was only the mission. Save the life. Flawlessly, without a tremor of hesitation, she plunged the needle into the soft tissue of the girl's throat, a precise and controlled motion that went against every rule in the civilian medical playbook. There was a faint hiss as the needle punctured the trachea. She attached the IV tubing to the hub of the catheter and the saline syringe to the other end. She removed the plunger from the syringe, creating a makeshift airway. It was crude. It was barbaric. And it worked.
The girl's chest gave a small, convulsive heave as a trickle of oxygen found its way into her starving lungs. The terrifying blue tint of her skin began to recede, replaced by a pale but living pink. Thorne stood frozen, her face a grotesque mask of disbelief and incandescent rage. The sight of her authority being so completely and utterly ignored, of this mousy, incompetent nurse performing a rogue surgical procedure in the middle of her hospital, had short-circuited her brain. "You're fired!" she shrieked, her voice cracking with fury. "You are finished! Security! I said get her out of here, now!" Alara rose smoothly to her feet, her focus already shifting. She turned not to Thorne, but to the stunned Dr. Carter, who had watched the entire impossible event unfold. She tossed the bloodied needle into a sharps container. She's stable for now, but she was exposed to the same organophosphate agent as her father. It was on the toy she was holding. It's a VX derivative, designed to be absorbed transdermally. Her voice was flat, clinical, a battlefield report. "He's not bleeding out, doctor. He's in cholinergic crisis. The bullet was a delivery system. You're giving him blood, but you should be pushing atropine and pralidoxime, massive doses, or he'll be dead in 5 minutes." Carter stared at her, his mind reeling. The quiet, clumsy nurse who could barely stock a supply cart was now speaking the language of advanced toxicology and special warfare. Everything she said, as insane as it sounded, suddenly clicked into place. The refractory hypotension, the subtle fasciculations he'd mistaken for tremors, the pinpoint pupils he'd dismissed as a trick of the light. It all made a terrifying kind of sense. But to defy Thorne, to follow the lead of a disgraced nurse. "Do it, doctor." Alara's voice was low, but it held the unyielding weight of absolute certainty. "Or I will." That was the moment the secondary threat materialized. Alara's senses, now fully online and screaming with combat-honed hyper-awareness, picked them up before anyone else. 2 men, dressed as hospital orderlies, had slipped through the chaos at the entrance. But they moved wrong. They didn't have the weary slump of overworked hospital staff. They moved with a predatory stillness, their eyes not on the patients, but on the layout of the room, the security positions, the exits. One of them had a slight, almost imperceptible bulge under the left side of his scrubs. Their gazes locked onto the trauma bay, onto the still-living form of Commander Riley. They were here to finish the job. Alara didn't hesitate. She didn't shout a warning. That would only create panic and give them an advantage. She moved. "Maya," she said, her voice a calm whisper. "Take the girl and her mother into the supply closet. Lock the door. Do not open it for anyone but me or Dr. Carter. Go." The young aide, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and newfound awe, nodded and quickly ushered the family to safety. As the first assassin began to draw his weapon, a pistol fitted with a bulky suppressor, Alara was already in motion. She grabbed a heavy, stainless steel instrument tray and in one fluid, violent motion, hurled it like a discus. It caught the man square in the face with a sickening metallic crunch. He staggered back, his nose shattering, his weapon clattering to the floor. The second assassin reacted instantly, turning to face this new, unexpected threat. But Alara was no longer there. She had used the motion of her throw to close the distance, moving low and fast. She came up inside his guard, her hand shooting out to grab the heavy, rolling oxygen tank next to the wall. With a surge of pure, focused strength, she kicked the release valve at its base and shoved it directly at him. The tank, now a 200-pound steel missile, slammed into his chest, pinning him against the wall with a force that audibly cracked his ribs and drove the air from his lungs. He slumped to the ground, gasping and incapacitated. It was over in less than 3 seconds. A sequence of brutal, silent, and flawlessly efficient violence. The suppressed pops of their own weapons, which they had tried to fire as they went down, were lost in the cacophony of the ER. Most of the staff, their attention fixed on the drama in the trauma bay, hadn't even registered what had happened. They just saw 2 orderlies suddenly on the floor, groaning. But Dr. Carter had seen it. His jaw was hanging open. He had witnessed a level of tactical and medical brilliance that simply did not exist in the civilian world. The clumsy nurse hadn't just saved the child and diagnosed the commander. She had just neutralized 2 professional assassins with an instrument tray and an oxygen tank. "Atropine, now," Alara repeated, her voice cutting through his shock. This time, he didn't hesitate. He turned and began shouting orders, the correct orders.
the ones that would save Commander Riley's life. The spell of Director Thorne's authority was broken, shattered by the arrival of a competence so profound it bordered on the supernatural. Thorne herself could only stand there, sputtering, her face pale with shock and fury, a queen deposed in her own throne room, utterly and completely irrelevant. The deafening roar began as a distant tremor, a rhythmic chopping that grew aggressively louder until it seemed to shake the very foundations of the hospital. It was the sound of military power, a sound Alara knew in her bones. A Black Hawk helicopter, its fuselage painted a non-reflective matte black, was descending rapidly toward the hospital's rooftop helipad. This was not a medical transport. This was an assertion of dominance. Moments later, the double doors to the emergency wing burst open, not with the hiss of their automatic sensors, but slammed inward by the force of two heavily armed military policemen in full tactical gear. They fanned out, securing the entrance, their movements crisp and professional, creating a corridor of intimidation. Through that corridor strode a figure of immense and immediate authority. General Marcus Thorne, a man whose granite-like face was etched with the weight of decades of command. He was a living legend in the special operations community, a 3-star general who oversaw a vast and shadowy portion of America's clandestine warfare. His eyes, the color of storm clouds, swept across the chaotic scene, instantly assessing every detail. The stabilized but critical Commander Riley, the recovering child being tended to by a shaken Maya, the two neutralized assassins being zip-tied by his men, the sputtering rage of Director Thorne, and finally, a blood-stained nurse standing calmly at the center of it all. The general's relentless forward momentum didn't even slow. He bypassed the babbling director, ignored the stunned Dr. Carter, and walked directly to Alara. A flicker of something profound and deeply paternal crossed his face, a mixture of relief, pride, and sorrow. He stopped a foot in front of her, his towering frame casting a long shadow. The entire emergency room had fallen into a shocked, absolute silence. "Ghost," he said, his voice a low, resonant boom that needed no amplification. It was not a question. It was a statement of fact, of recognition. "I should have known they'd find you even here. It seems you can't stop running into trouble, son." The term of endearment, so incongruous and yet so clearly earned, hung in the air. Alara met his gaze, and for the first time since the crisis began, a flicker of the old exhaustion, the deep-seated trauma she had tried to outrun, showed in her eyes. "They brought the trouble to me, sir," she replied, her voice quiet but clear. General Thorne gave a grim, approving nod. He then turned to face the assembled staff, his gaze sweeping over their stunned, disbelieving faces. His eyes finally landed on Director Elizabeth Thorne, who looked as if she'd been struck by lightning. "For those of you who are confused," the general began, his voice now rising to a full, declarative command that echoed off the tiled walls. "Allow me to introduce you. This is not Nurse Vance. This is Sergeant First Class Alara Vance, United States Army, Special Operations Command. Her call sign is Ghost. She is the single most decorated combat medic in the history of JSOC. She is the recipient of the Distinguished Service Cross for her actions in the Hindu Kush, where she held off an enemy assault single-handedly for 6 hours after her entire team was incapacitated, saving all of them. She holds 2 silver stars, 4 bronze stars for valor, and 5 purple hearts." He took a step closer to the director, his voice dropping to a dangerous, menacing growl. "The clumsy woman you were about to have thrown out of your hospital has forgotten more about saving lives under catastrophic pressure than your entire staff will ever know. The incompetent nurse you have been tormenting for months is the sole reason Commander Riley and his daughter are not on their way to the morgue right now." The public humiliation was a palpable force, pressing down on Director Thorne, whose face had gone from enraged to ashen white. The general turned back to the room at large. "As of this moment, this entire wing is under federal jurisdiction as the site of an ongoing investigation into an act of terror against a United States military officer. And Sergeant Vance," he pointed a commanding finger at Alara, "is in tactical command of all medical operations related to this incident. Her word is law. Her orders are to be followed without question or hesitation. Anyone who interferes,
impedes, or even questions her authority will be charged with obstructing a federal investigation and will be removed from this hospital in handcuffs. Are there any questions?" The silence was profound, broken only by the steady, rhythmic beep of Commander Riley's heart monitor, a testament to the life Alara had just saved. Dr. Carter stared at Alara, his face a complex tapestry of shock, shame, and a dawning, profound respect. He had seen greatness, and he had been blind to it. Director Thorne, however, seemed to find one last vestige of her shattered arrogance. "You can't do this," she stammered, her voice a weak, trembling whisper. "This is my hospital. I am the director. I have a board. I have lawyers." General Thorne's face hardened into a mask of pure, cold fury. "Your authority here is an illusion, and it has just evaporated," he said, his voice lethally quiet. He nodded to one of his aides, a major carrying a secured tablet. "Major, present the evidence." The major stepped forward, turning the tablet so Director Thorne could see the screen. It displayed a series of encrypted bank transfers, routing numbers traced back to an offshore account, and a final, damning piece of evidence. A transcription of a phone call recorded just that morning. "The security protocols for the north entrance will be relaxed between 1000 and 1030 hours, a voice said, a voice that was clearly and unmistakably Director Thorne's. "I trust my consultancy fee will be deposited upon completion of your business." "You were approached 2 weeks ago," the general stated, his voice flat and devoid of any emotion. "You were told it was a matter of simple industrial espionage, a rival company wanting to access proprietary medical research. You were paid $200,000 to create a security blind spot for 30 minutes. You didn't ask questions. You just took the money." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "You didn't care what their business was, as long as your account was credited. Your greed, your pathological need for money and status, made you an accessory to the attempted assassination of a national hero. You sold him out for the price of a luxury car." The last vestiges of Director Thorne's composure disintegrated. Her face crumpled, the carefully constructed mask of the powerful executive dissolving into the raw, terrified face of a petty criminal caught in the act. A low, keening wail escaped her lips. "No, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know what they were going to do," she sobbed, her words tumbling out in a pathetic, incoherent stream. "It doesn't matter what you knew," the general said, his voice like the closing of a tomb. He gave a sharp, almost imperceptible nod to the 2 military policemen who had been standing by. They moved forward, their expressions impassive. "Director Elizabeth Thorne, for your role in conspiring to commit an act of terror against an officer of the United States Armed Forces, you are under arrest." As the cold, hard steel of the handcuffs clicked around her wrists, Elizabeth Thorne collapsed completely. The arrogant, tyrannical administrator was gone, replaced by a weeping, babbling mess. Her shrieks of denial and pleas for mercy were ignored as the MPs hauled her unceremoniously to her feet and began to lead her away, a public and absolute end to her reign of petty cruelty. The staff watched in stunned silence, a mixture of fear and a dark, undeniable satisfaction on their faces. The dragon had been slain, not by a knight in shining armor, but by the quiet, clumsy mouse she had spent months trying to crush. 2 days later, the chaos had receded, replaced by a quiet, watchful calm. Commander Riley was stable and recovering in a secure ICU, his daughter asleep in a chair by his bed, clutching her plush wolf, now thoroughly decontaminated. The hospital had returned to a semblance of normalcy, but the tectonic plates of its social hierarchy had been permanently shifted. The story of what had happened had spread like wildfire, whispered in break rooms and hallways, already becoming the stuff of legend. Nurse Vance, the clumsy ghost, was gone. In her place stood Sergeant Vance, the quiet hero. Alara found herself in a borrowed office, staring out the window at the city below. She hadn't slept, but she didn't feel tired. The adrenaline had been replaced by a familiar, heavy weight, the burden of being Ghost once more. She had run so far and for so long, trying to escape the violence and the responsibility, only to find it had followed her into the one place she thought she would be safe. The door opened and General Thorne entered, closing it softly behind him. He looked older, more tired than he had in the ER. He held out a steaming foam cup. Figured you could use this, he said. Still black, 2 sugars, right? Alara took the coffee, a small, sad smile touching her lips. You always remember, sir. It's my job to remember the important things, he said, sitting in the chair opposite her.
They sat in a comfortable silence for a moment, the silence of 2 soldiers who had seen too much to need idle chatter.
The secretary sends his personal thanks, the general finally said. Commander Riley is going to make a full recovery. His wife asked me to tell you. Well, I don't think I have the words to do her justice. You saved her entire world, Alara. Alara just nodded, staring into her coffee cup. I did my job, sir. You did more than that, he corrected gently. You reminded us what a true warrior looks like. Which brings me to why I'm here. The brass wants you back. Not in the field. They want you to run the entire combat medic training program at Fort Bragg. Full commission, colonel's rank. You'd be in charge of writing the doctrine for the next generation of medics. No more hiding, no more running. A position of power, of respect. The one you've earned 10 times over. It was the ultimate offer, a recognition of her true value, a chance to step out of the shadows and into the light, on her own terms. She was quiet for a long time, considering it. The old Alara, the one who had first enlisted, would have jumped at the chance. But the woman sitting here now, the one who had seen the cost of that life, hesitated. I ran away, sir, she said, her voice low. I ran because I was tired of the noise, tired of the killing. I wanted quiet. I thought being a civilian nurse, being invisible, would give me that. I was wrong. She looked up, and her eyes were clear, the conflict that had haunted them for years finally settling. Hiding isn't the answer, but a desk isn't either. My place isn't behind a desk writing policy. It's on the floor, with the patients. My hands are what works, sir. That's where I can do the most good. She leaned forward, a new energy in her voice, the spark of an idea. What if there was another way? A new unit. A small, rapid response medical team. Not military, civilian. We'd operate under FEMA or DHS. A ghost team that deploys to catastrophic events here at home. Mass casualty incidents, natural disasters, complex terror attacks like this one. A team that cuts through the bureaucracy and just saves lives. I could build it. I could lead it. It was a synthesis, an integration of her 2 worlds. She wouldn't be Ghost the soldier or Vance the nurse. She would be something new, something forged from both. The general listened intently, a slow, proud smile spreading across his face. He had offered her a crown, and she had asked for a hammer and a blueprint instead. I think, he said slowly, that is the best damn idea I've heard in 20 years. You write the proposal. I'll get you the funding. And the personnel. There was a soft knock on the door. Doctor. Carter stood there, looking hesitant. General. Sergeant, he said, his voice filled with a new, profound respect. Sorry to interrupt. It's all right, Doctor, Alara said. Come in. Carter stepped inside, his eyes fixed on Alara. I just wanted to say, I was a surgeon in Fallujah for 2 tours. I thought I'd seen everything. I was wrong. I've never seen anything like you. What you did, it was on another level entirely. He took a deep breath. I heard what you said to the general just now, about a new kind of team. If you're building one, and if you'll have me, I want in. I want to learn from you. It wasn't a job application. It was a pledge of fealty from one professional to another, a recognition of shared trauma and a shared purpose. He had seen the real thing, and he knew he had to be a part of it. Alara looked from Carter's earnest face to the general's proud smile. For the first time in years, the crushing weight on her shoulders felt a little lighter. She hadn't found the quiet life she thought she wanted. Instead, she had found something better, a purpose. She had integrated her past with her present, not by hiding from it, but by repurposing it. The story ends here, but her new mission was just beginning, a testament to a profound and simple truth. True strength is not loud. It is not arrogant. It is quiet, and it is competent. It waits. And when the moment of catastrophic crisis arrives, when the hollow posturing of the insecure and the arrogant shatters into dust, that quiet competence will rise, and it will always, relentlessly, and flawlessly save the day.